The city was alive with lights, a buzzing metropolis that pulsed with energy as Ella adjusted her pearl earrings, staring at her reflection in the gilded mirror of the hotel suite. The dinner invitation had arrived only days earlier, an exclusive affair hosted by Mark's enigmatic boss, Alexander Grayson. It was an evening Ella felt unprepared for. Mark had worked tirelessly for the past decade to ascend the corporate ladder, but she'd always been the unseen hand, steadying him when the climb became treacherous. The private dining room of Le Marais, one of Manhattan's most coveted culinary gems, was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the shimmering skyline, and the atmosphere hummed with muted sophistication. Mr. Grayson was already seated when they arrived, an imposing figure with silver-threaded hair and piercing eyes that seemed to dissect the world. He greeted them warmly, but there was something about his presence that made Ella's skin prickle. A glimpse behind the curtain dinner began with delicate amuse-bouches and a discussion of Mark's latest project, a high-stakes merger that had consumed him for months. Grayson was gracious, praising Mark's tenacity and innovation. Yet, as the conversation unfolded, Ella felt his gaze shift to her, a flicker of something inscrutable passing through his expression. "Ella," he said, his baritone smooth as velvet, "Mark tells me you're the bedrock of his success. It's rare to see such steadfast support in this city." She smiled politely, unsure how to respond. "I try to help where I can." Grayson's lips curved into a sly grin. "Undoubtedly, you do more than try." Mark, oblivious to the undertone, chuckled. "She's my anchor, that's for sure." It was a harmless comment, but the way Grayson's eyes lingered on her left Ella uneasy. The first ripple by the time the entrees arrived, an artful presentation of seared duck breast and caramelized shallots. Grayson's comments had grown bolder. "You have an elegance, Ella," he remarked, "poised, yet approachable. It's a rare quality." "Thank you," she murmured, feeling the weight of Mark's obliviousness as he laughed at something on his phone. A work email, perhaps? The evening's climax began innocuously enough. Mark excused himself to take a call. Ella, now alone with Grayson, tried to focus on the half-melted chocolate sculpture adorning her plate, but his voice broke the silence. "Mark's a lucky man," he said, leaning forward, his tone suddenly intimate. "But luck runs out when it's taken for granted." Ella's breath hitched. "I'm not sure I follow." Grayson smiled, a predator's grin. "Let's just say I see potential in you, Ella. Potential that goes beyond being someone's shadow." Before she could respond, Mark returned, his presence snapping the charged moment like a thread pulled too tight. A shocking proposition the night drew to a close with espresso and handshakes, but as they prepared to leave, Grayson's hand lingered on Ella's shoulder. "I'd like to discuss an opportunity with you, Ella. Privately. It could be mutually beneficial." She managed a strained nod, and the ride home was a blur of Mark's chatter about promotions and potential raises. Ella's mind raced. What exactly had Grayson meant? Was this some convoluted test of loyalty, or something darker? The answer came 3 days later in the form of an email, a cryptic message inviting her to a second dinner, this time without Mark. It was accompanied by a thinly veiled threat. "Refusal can have consequences, but I assure you, your cooperation could make Mark's dreams a reality." The unraveling begins. Ella didn't tell Mark about the email. Not at first. She needed time to think, to process the implications. But secrets have a way of growing heavy, and by the time Mark found her staring blankly at the kitchen counter, the weight was unbearable. "Is something wrong?" he asked, setting down his briefcase. Ella opened her mouth, ready to spill everything, but the words froze on her tongue. She thought about the sacrifices he'd made, the sleepless nights, the years of grinding to reach a place of recognition. Could she risk it all? Instead, she shook her head. "Just tired." Mark smiled, brushing a kiss across her temple. "I get it. Long week. Don't worry. Things are looking up." As he disappeared down the hall, her phone buzzed with another email notification. This time, it was a location. The Madison Suite, Hotel Ritz, 8 p.m. The message wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. Ella's heart pounded as she stared at the screen. One decision could unravel everything she built, everything Mark had worked for. But another decision could leave her vulnerable, entangled in a web she might never escape. She deleted the message, but the shadow of its contents loomed large. Ella couldn't shake the weight of the email. All day, her mind reeled with questions she didn't dare speak aloud. The stakes of her next move felt monumental. If she ignored Grayson's invitation, what might he do? Mark's career hung in the balance. And yet, accepting it meant walking into a trap she didn't fully understand. By the time Thursday evening arrived, Ella found herself in front of her closet, rifling through a sea of dresses. She hated how much thought she was giving this. Grayson wasn't someone she wanted to impress, but appearing indifferent seemed equally dangerous. Settling on a simple black sheath dress and low heels, Ella stared at her reflection. "You're not doing this for him," she whispered to herself. "This is for Mark." She left the house before Mark returned from work, leaving a hastily scribbled note. "Meeting an old friend for dinner. Don't wait up." The lie felt like a betrayal, but the truth was far worse. The Madison Suite the Ritz was as opulent as Ella had imagined. Ornate chandeliers cast a golden glow over polished marble floors, and impeccably dressed guests floated through the lobby. A concierge escorted her to the Madison Suite on the 20th floor, where Grayson awaited. The suite was a world unto itself, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city. Grayson stood near a sleek bar cart, pouring 2 glasses of an amber liquid that shimmered in the dim light. "Ella," he greeted her warmly, though his smile held a dangerous edge. "You look stunning." "Thank you," she replied stiffly, taking the drink he offered. She didn't sip it. He gestured for her to sit on a cream-colored sofa. "I'm glad you came. I assume you understand the importance of discretion tonight." Ella's stomach nodded. "I'm here to hear you out. That's all." Grayson chuckled, settling into the armchair opposite her. "Of course. Let's not waste time then. Mark's future at the firm is bright. He's the frontrunner for a senior VP position. But in a competitive world, small edges can make all the difference. And you think I'm that edge?" Ella shot back, her voice sharper than intended. He studied her, unfazed. "Your loyalty to Mark is admirable. But loyalty doesn't always mean self-sacrifice. Sometimes, it means taking control of a situation to secure what's best for both of you." Grayson leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Mark's career is safe, Ella. If you and I reach an understanding." Lines drawn and crossed, Ella's pulse raced. "What kind of understanding?" Grayson's smirk deepened. "I won't insult your intelligence by pretending this is a purely professional matter. I find you captivating, and I believe we could enjoy each other's company." Her jaw clenched. "You're asking me to have an affair." "I'm asking you to consider the broader picture," he corrected smoothly. "This isn't about romance or betrayal. It's about influence, power, aligning our interests in a way that benefits us both." Ella stood abruptly, her heart hammering. "You're disgusting." Grayson rose as well, blocking her path to the door. His tone remained calm, but his eyes flashed with menace. "Think carefully, Ella. This isn't about me. It's about you and Mark. Turning me down doesn't just hurt you. It hurts him, his career, his future." She stepped back, panic rising. "This is blackmail." Grayson shrugged, unperturbed. "Call it what you will. But you know I have the leverage to back it up." Secrets in the shadows. Ella left the suite trembling, his final words echoing in her ears. The ride home felt surreal, the city blurring into an incoherent smear of lights and shadows. How had she ended up here, cornered by a man who held so much power over their lives? When she reached home, Mark was already asleep, sprawled across the bed with his laptop still open beside him. She stood in the doorway, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. He looked peaceful, oblivious. If only she could tell him. But what good would it do? She'd seen Grayson's ruthlessness firsthand. There was no telling how far he'd go if she resisted. The unexpected visitor the next morning, Ella tried to bury the events of the previous night under routine. She busied herself with errands and calls, determined to act normal. But by mid-afternoon, a knock at the door shattered her fragile calm. Standing on the doorstep was a young woman Ella didn't recognize. She was striking, with sharp cheekbones and a sleek bob, her expression unreadable. "Ella?" the woman asked, her voice low and measured. "I'm Claire, Alexander Grayson's assistant." Ella's blood ran cold. "What do you want?" Claire glanced over her shoulder before stepping closer. "I shouldn't be here, but I need to warn you. He's done this before." "Done what?" Ella whispered, her heart pounding. "Used his position to manipulate people. Women, specifically. You're not the first, and you won't be the last unless someone stops him." Ella's mind whirled. "Why are you telling me this?" Claire hesitated. "Because I've been where you are, and I know how it ends if you don't fight back." Before Ella could respond, Claire pressed a folded piece of paper into her hand. "This has everything you need. Use it wisely." Then she was gone, leaving Ella standing in the doorway with more questions than answers. She unfolded the paper with shaking hands. It was a list of names, women, dates, places, and at the bottom, a single phone number with the words, "Call if you want to take him down." A dangerous game begins that evening. Ella sat alone in the living room. The list spread out before her like a roadmap to ruin. Each name represented someone who had crossed paths with Grayson and potentially suffered for it. But exposing him wouldn't come without risks. If she failed, the fallout could destroy Mark's career, their life, everything. The phone on the coffee table seemed to mock her, daring her to act. As the clock ticked toward midnight, Ella reached for it, her fingers trembling. The line rang once, twice, and then a voice answered. "I was wondering when you'd call." Ella froze. It wasn't the woman's voice she expected. It was Grayson. The sound of Alexander Grayson's voice on the other end of the line chilled Ella to her core. She had expected to hear the mysterious Claire, the woman who had handed her the list, or perhaps someone connected to her. Instead, it was him, the man whose mere presence had turned her life upside down. "You're surprisingly resourceful," he said smoothly, as if they were merely discussing the weather. "But I have to wonder, what exactly were you hoping to accomplish?" Ella clenched the phone tighter, her breath hitching. "How did you know you'd call?" Grayson interrupted, his tone smug. "Let's just say I make it my business to anticipate these things. And as for Claire, she's not as clever as she thinks." Ella's mind raced. Had Claire betrayed her? Or was Grayson simply playing another of his cruel games? "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to sound composed. Grayson chuckled, the sound sending shivers down her spine. "The same thing I wanted before. Cooperation. I told you, Ella, this doesn't have to be messy." The reluctant ally after the call ended. Ella sat in stunned silence, the list of names still spread before her. She felt trapped, every move she made only tightening the snare Grayson had laid around her. But one thing was clear. If she was going to outmaneuver him, she needed to know more. The first step was Claire. Ella found the number Claire had scribbled on the list and called it, half expecting Grayson to answer again. But this time, it was her. "Ella," Claire said, her voice urgent, "did he contact you?" "He answered the number you gave me," Ella replied, trying to keep the panic from her voice. "What's going on?" There was a pause before Claire spoke again, her tone darker now. "He's watching me. I shouldn't have reached out to you, but I couldn't let you face him alone." "Why?" Ella asked, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "Why put yourself in danger for someone you don't even know?" "Because I know what he's capable of," Claire replied. "And I know what it's like to have him ruin your life." Ella gripped the phone tightly, sensing the weight of Claire's words. "What did he do to you?" Claire hesitated, then sighed. "Not over the phone. Meet me tomorrow at the Broadstone Cafe, 2 p.m. I'll explain everything." Unveiling the past, the cafe was bustling when Ella arrived, the hum of conversation and clinking dishes masking her anxiety. Claire sat at a corner table, her posture tense and her eyes scanning the room like a hunted animal. "Over here," she called, gesturing Ella to join her. As soon as Ella sat, Claire slid a manila folder across the table. "This is everything I've gathered on him over the years. He's untouchable in public, but privately, he's left a trail of destruction." Ella opened the folder, her eyes scanning its contents. Photos, emails, and statements from women who had suffered at Grayson's hands. Each story was a mirror of her own. Unwanted advances, veiled threats, careers destroyed when they resisted. How has he gotten away with this? Ella whispered, horrified. "Power," Claire said bitterly, "and fear." Most of these women didn't come forward because they knew what he'd do to them. Ella's stomach churned. The stakes felt impossibly high. But as she read through the dossier, she noticed something curious, a name that appeared more than once. Hannah Parker. "Who's Hannah?" Ella asked, pointing to the name. Claire's expression darkened. She was his biggest mistake. Hannah was the wife of one of Grayson's business rivals. When she rejected him, he tried to destroy her family. But she fought back, and she almost won. "Almost?" Ella pressed. "He silenced her," Claire replied grimly, "but not before she gathered enough evidence to bring him down. If we can find her, she might be the key to ending this." A dangerous connection that night. Ella debated telling Mark everything. He deserved to know what was happening. But how could she explain her involvement without implicating herself? How could she make him understand the impossible choices she was facing? Instead, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling as Mark slept beside her. Grayson's words echoed in her mind, mixing with Claire's warning and the stories in the dossier. Every decision felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, jolting her from her thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number. "You're not as invisible as you think." Ella's blood ran cold. She deleted the message, but the fear lingered. Grayson was watching her, just as Claire had warned. But how far would he go to protect himself? The meeting the next day, Ella and Claire tracked down Hannah Parker to a small town 2 hours outside the city. The woman who greeted them at the door was a shadow of the person in the dossier, her once bright eyes dulled by years of pain. "I don't want any trouble," Hannah said, crossing her arms defensively. "We're not here to cause trouble," Ella assured her. "We just need your help. Grayson is trying to ruin my life, and Claire said you might have evidence to stop him." Hannah hesitated, her gaze shifting between the two women. "I don't have anything anymore." He made sure of that. "But you fought back," Claire pressed. "You stood up to him when no one else could. Please, we need to know how." Hannah sighed, her shoulders sagging under the weight of old wounds. "He preys on people's fear. But the only way to beat someone like him is to take away their power. You have to expose him, publicly. Anything less, and he'll bury you." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. Ella nodded, her resolve hardening. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt a glimmer of hope. But as they left Hannah's house, a sleek black car idled down the street, its windows tinted. Ella's stomach churned. Grayson was watching. Again. The new threat. By the time Ella returned home, her nerves were frayed. She parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, trying to calm the storm raging in her mind. But when she stepped inside, the sight waiting for her made her heart drop. Mark was sitting at the kitchen table, his face pale and drawn. In his hand was the manila folder, the one Claire had given her. "Ella," he said, his voice trembling, "what the hell is this? And why is Grayson calling me, saying my wife is making dangerous enemies?" The room swirled around her, the tightrope finally snapping. "Mark, I can explain." Mark's face was a mix of disbelief and fury as he dropped the manila folder onto the table, the incriminating documents scattering like pieces of a broken puzzle. "Explain? Explain what, Ella?" "That my boss, the man who controls my career, is threatening you? That you've been hiding this from me?" Ella took a step toward him, her hands trembling. "Mark, I didn't know how to tell you. I was trying to protect you. Protect us? Protect me?" Mark's voice rose, his frustration palpable. "By keeping secrets? By meeting with him behind my back?" His jaw clenched, and he ran a hand through his hair. "How long has this been going on?" Ella opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Mark's phone buzzed on the table. Both of them froze. The screen lit up with a name that made Ella's stomach drop. Alexander Grayson. Mark snatched the phone and stared at it for a moment before rejecting the call. "This is unbelievable," he muttered. "What does he want now?" "He's trying to control us," Ella said, her voice urgent. "He wants to keep you in line by using me as leverage." Mark's eyes narrowed. "Leverage for what? Did he proposition you?" The question came out as a whisper, but the weight behind it was crushing. Ella hesitated for a moment too long, and the silence spoke volumes. Mark's expression darkened, the betrayal hitting him like a physical blow. "I can't believe this." The hidden agenda as the tension between them mounted. Ella's phone buzzed next. She flinched, dreading what new torment awaited her. The message was from an unknown number. "You should have listened. Now both of you will pay." She showed it to Mark, who read it with a grim expression. "He's not bluffing," Mark said, pacing the kitchen. "He has the power to destroy everything we've built." "Then we have to fight back," Ella said, her voice firmer now. "We can't let him manipulate us like this." Mark stopped pacing and turned to her, his eyes filled with doubt. "How? You've seen what he's capable of, and now he knows you've been digging into his past." "We're not alone," Ella replied, pulling out Claire's list of names. "There are others, women he's hurt, people who can help us take him down." Mark scanned the list, his brow furrowing. This is dangerous, Ella. If we go after him and fail, it'll ruin us." Ella reached for his hand, her voice steady. "If we don't, he'll ruin us anyway." A fragile alliance the next morning, Mark surprised Ella by agreeing to meet with Claire. "If we're going to do this," he said, "we need to be smart. No more secrets." Claire joined them at a discreet cafe downtown, her demeanor wary but resolute. She spread out the remaining contents of her dossier, detailing Grayson's pattern of manipulation and abuse. Mark listened intently, his initial anger giving way to a grim determination. "There's something you need to know," Claire said, her tone serious. "Grayson doesn't just destroy careers. He destroys lives. If we go public, he'll fight back with everything he has." "What about the women on this list?" Mark asked. "Will they help us?" Claire hesitated. "Some might, but most are too scared to come forward. Grayson has silenced them before. They won't risk it again unless they believe we can win." Ella exchanged a glance with Mark. "Then we need to find someone he hasn't silenced. Someone like Hannah Parker." Claire's expression darkened. "Hannah is a wild card. She's already been burned once. Convincing her to join us won't be easy." "We have to try," Ella said firmly. "She's the only one who's come close to beating him." The return to Hannah later that day, Ella and Mark drove to Hannah's quiet suburban home. She answered the door with reluctance, her guarded expression softening slightly when she saw Ella, but her eyes hardened again when she noticed Mark. "Who's this?" "My husband," Ella explained. "He knows everything now, and we need your help." Hannah crossed her arms. "I told you, I'm done fighting him. I don't have anything left." "But you have the truth," Mark interjected, his voice earnest. "And if we can bring that to light, maybe we can stop him for good." Hannah hesitated, the pain of her past etched across her face. "You don't know what you're asking," she said quietly. "When I went after Grayson, he didn't just come for me. He came for my family. My husband lost his business. My kids were bullied. We had to move across the country to escape him." "We're not asking you to relive that," Ella said gently. "But if you have any evidence, anything we can use, it could make all the difference." For a long moment, Hannah said nothing. Then she sighed and gestured for them to come inside. "I kept one thing," she admitted. "Something Grayson doesn't know about." The secret weapon. Hannah led them to a small, cluttered office in the back of the house. From a locked drawer in her desk, she retrieved a flash drive. "This is the only copy," she said, holding it up. "It's a recording of a conversation I had with Grayson. He threatened me, but he also admitted to some of the things he's done." Mark's eyes widened. "Why didn't you use this before?" "I tried," Hannah said bitterly, But without corroboration, it wasn't enough. And when he found out I was trying to expose him, he destroyed everything else I had. Ella reached for the flash drive, her hands trembling. This could be the key. It could also be a death sentence, Hannah warned. If he finds out you have it, he'll stop at nothing to bury you. The plan takes shape that night. Ella, Mark, and Claire huddled around their dining room table, the weight of the flash drive heavy between them. Claire plugged it into her laptop, and they listened to the recording in stunned silence. Grayson's voice was unmistakable, his threats chilling in their specificity. "This is it," Claire said, her voice almost reverent. "This is what we need to bring him down. But how do we release it?" Mark asked. "If we go to the press, Grayson will retaliate before the story even breaks." "We need to go bigger than the press," Claire replied. "We need to make this public in a way he can't control." Ella's mind raced. "Social media," she suggested. "If we post it online, it'll spread faster than he can contain it." Mark frowned. "And paint a target on our backs in the process?" Claire shrugged. "It's risky, but if we want to stop him, we have to be willing to take that risk." As they debated the best course of action, Ella's phone buzzed again. This time, the message was a single word: TikTok. She looked at Mark, fear flashing in her eyes. "We're running out of time." The message, ominous in its simplicity, sent shivers down Ella's spine. The clock was indeed ticking, and Grayson's shadow loomed larger with each passing moment. As the three of them sat in tense silence, Ella knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back. Claire leaned forward, breaking the quiet. "We need to move now. If Grayson senses what we're planning, he'll make his move first." Mark exhaled sharply, his jaw clenched. "What about the fallout? What happens when this goes public?" "It's a gamble," Claire admitted. "But if we don't act, he'll destroy us piece by piece." A bold decision. Ella stared at the flash drive on the table, its weight disproportionate to its size. It held the power to dismantle Grayson's empire, or to drag them all into the abyss. She looked at Mark, then at Claire, and made her decision. "Let's do it," she said, her voice steady. "We released the recording." Mark's eyes met hers, a mix of fear and admiration flickering in his gaze. "Are you sure? Once this is out there, we can't undo it." "I'm sure," Ella replied. "It's the only way." The viral gambit. The plan was set in motion with surgical precision. Claire created an anonymous social media account and uploaded the recording, tagging prominent journalists, activists, and legal organizations. Within minutes, the video began to spread like wildfire. Grayson's chilling threats and admissions were impossible to ignore. Ella and Mark watched the view count climb from their living room, the weight of their actions sinking in with each passing second. News outlets picked up the story within hours, and #GraysonExposed began trending worldwide. The public's outrage was immediate and explosive. Whistleblowers from Grayson's past began coming forward, emboldened by the recording. Women whose stories had been silenced for years finally found a platform. The retaliation, but the backlash was swift. Grayson's legal team released a statement, calling the recording fabricated and threatening lawsuits against anyone involved in its dissemination. Ella's phone buzzed incessantly with messages from blocked numbers, ranging from veiled warnings to outright threats. The final blow came the next morning, when Mark received a call from the firm's board of directors. They had placed him on indefinite leave pending an internal investigation. His face was pale as he hung up, but his resolve didn't waver. "They're trying to scare us," he said, his voice firm, "but they won't win." A surprising ally. As the dust began to settle, an unexpected figure entered the fray. Hannah Parker. Inspired by the recording's impact, she went public with her own story. Her courage sparked a wave of solidarity, and more victims came forward with damning evidence against Grayson. Hannah's testimony proved to be a turning point. Her detailed account, combined with the recording, painted an undeniable picture of Grayson's corruption. The media turned against him, and even his staunchest allies began to distance themselves. The empire crumbles within weeks. Grayson's carefully constructed empire began to collapse. The board of directors launched a formal investigation, and the SEC announced a probe into his business dealings. Grayson's once unshakable confidence faltered, and for the first time, he seemed vulnerable. Ella and Mark watched the news coverage with a mix of relief and disbelief. Their lives had been upended, but they had survived the storm. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Ella turned to Mark. "Do you think it's over?" Mark hesitated before answering. "For him? Yes. For us? I think we're just beginning." Rebuilding the future as Grayson faced legal battles and public disgrace, Ella and Mark began to pick up the pieces of their lives. The firm eventually reinstated Mark, but he declined the offer, choosing instead to pursue a new path, one free from Grayson's shadow. Ella found herself reflecting on the ordeal, realizing how much she had underestimated her own strength. She had always been Mark's anchor, but now she knew she was capable of so much more. The final twist months later, as the world moved on from the scandal, Ella received an unexpected envelope in the mail. It contained a handwritten note from Grayson. "Ella, you played your part well. But remember, chess is a game of patience. The king may fall, but the board remains. Watch your next moves carefully." There was no signature, but the threat was clear. Ella stared at the note, her chest tightening. She had won the battle, but Grayson wasn't finished. She crumpled the note and threw it into the fire, watching the flames consume it. Whatever games Grayson had left to play, she was ready. For now, the future was hers to shape.